The sound of shattering glass jolted me from my reverie. I stood frozen, staring at the remains of Mark's favorite crystal tumbler scattered across the kitchen floor. For a moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat, thundering in my ears. "Lily, what the hell was that?" Mark's voice boomed from the living room. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I reached for the broom. "It's nothing, dear. Just dropped a glass." Mark appeared in the doorway, his face twisted in a scowl. "Nothing. That was my grandfather's tumbler. How could you be so careless?" I bit my lip, fighting back tears. This wasn't the Mark I had fallen in love with 20 years ago. That Mark would have helped me clean up, maybe even laughed about it. This Mark, I hardly recognized him anymore. "I'm sorry," I whispered, avoiding his gaze as I swept up the shards. He let out an exasperated sigh. "You're always sorry, Lily. Maybe if you paid more attention to what you were doing instead of daydreaming all the time, these things wouldn't happen." I wanted to argue, to remind him of all the times I'd carefully tended to his precious belongings, but I knew it would only make things worse. Instead, I nodded silently and continued cleaning. "And speaking of paying attention," Mark continued, his voice dripping with disdain, "have you even bothered to check on my mother today?" I froze mid-sweep. "Clara, but I thought you were going to." "I asked you to do it, Lily. Can't you handle one simple task?" The broom clattered to the floor as I straightened up, finally meeting his eyes. "Mark, that's not fair. I've been taking care of your mother every day for weeks. You said you'd visit her today." His eyes narrowed. "Are you calling me a liar?" "No, I'm just saying." "You know what?" He cut me off, his voice rising. "If you can't even remember a simple request, how can I trust you to take proper care of my mother? She deserves better than this, Lily. Better than you." His words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the counter for support. "How can you say that? I love Clara. I've done everything I can for her." Mark laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound that sent chills down my spine. "Everything? Really? Then why did I get a call from her doctor today saying she missed her appointment, an appointment you were supposed to take her to?" My mind raced. The appointment. How could I have forgotten? I must have mixed up the dates. I'll call and reschedule right away." "Don't bother," Mark spat. "I'll take care of it myself. Clearly, I can't rely on you for anything important." As he stormed out of the kitchen, I sank to the floor, heedless of the remaining glass shards. How had we come to this? Where was the man who had once looked at me with such love and admiration? The ringing of my cell phone startled me out of my misery. I fumbled to answer it, grateful for the distraction. "Lily, are you okay?" It was Faith, my oldest friend, her voice laced with concern. I took a shaky breath. "Faith, I don't know what to do anymore. Mark, he's not the same man I married." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Lily, listen to me. You need to get out of there. Come stay with me for a while. We'll figure this out together." As I listened to Faith's words, a small spark of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe it was time to stop making excuses. Maybe it was time to fight back. "Okay," I whispered, my resolve strengthening with each word. "I'll be there soon." Little did I know, as I hung up the phone and began to pack a bag, that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change my life forever. I woke up on Faith's lumpy couch, disoriented and groggy. For a blissful moment, I forgot why I was there. Then reality came crashing back, and I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. "Morning, sleepyhead," Faith chirped, bustling into the living room with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "How'd you sleep?" I sat up, gratefully accepting the coffee. "As well as can be expected, I guess. Thanks again for letting me stay." Faith waved off my gratitude. "That's what friends are for." "Now what's the game plan?" I sighed, staring into my mug. "I don't know, Faith. I can't just abandon Clara. She needs me." "And what about what you need, Lily?" Faith's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't keep setting yourself on fire to keep others warm." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Where the hell are you?" Mark's voice was a mixture of anger and panic. "I've been calling all night." "I'm at Faith's," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I needed some space to think." "Think? What's there to think about? Get home now. My mother needs you." I felt a spark of defiance ignite in my chest. "No, Mark, I'm not coming home right now. We need to talk about how things have been." "Are you serious?" He cut me off. You're abandoning my sick mother because you need to think? I always knew you were selfish, Lily, but this is a new low. His words stung, but I held my ground. That's not fair, Mark. I've been taking care of Clara for months. I just need a little time. Time? He scoffed. Fine. Take your time, but don't expect to waltz back in here like nothing happened. And don't bother calling Clara. I'll tell her you've abandoned us both. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, tears welling up in my eyes. Faith gently took the phone from my hand. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I wiped my eyes, a mix of anger and determination rising within me. No, I'm done being sorry. I'm going to see Clara myself. An hour later, I stood outside Clara's door, my heart pounding. I knocked softly. Come in, Clara's weak voice called out. I entered to find her propped up in bed, looking pale but alert. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Lily? Mark said you'd left. No, Clara, I said, sitting beside her. I just needed a little break. I would never abandon you. Clara reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. I know that, dear. I've seen how hard you work, how much you care. Don't let Mark make you doubt yourself. I felt tears threatening again. But I forgot your doctor's appointment. I've been so scattered lately. Hush, Clara interrupted. We all make mistakes. The question is, why has my son been making you feel so terrible about yours? I looked at her, startled by her directness. I don't know. He's changed so much, Clara. I barely recognize him anymore. Clara's eyes narrowed. I've noticed it too. There's something he's not telling us, Lily. I can feel it. Just then, we heard the front door open. Mark's voice called out, Mom, are you awake? Clara squeezed my hand. Don't let him bully you, dear. Stand your ground. As Mark's footsteps approached, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. Whatever secrets Mark was hiding, whatever storm was brewing, I knew I had to be strong. For myself, for Clara, and for the woman I used to be. The bedroom door swung open, and Mark froze in the doorway, his eyes darting between Clara and me. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. This was it, the moment of truth, and I was ready to face it head-on. The tension in Clara's bedroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mark's eyes darted between Clara and me, his jaw clenching visibly. What are you doing here? He growled, his gaze fixed on me. I straightened my spine, drawing strength from Clara's warm hand in mine. I'm visiting Clara, Mark. She's important to me, too. Clara's voice, though soft, carried a steely undertone. Mark, dear, why don't you join us? We were just having a lovely chat. Mark hesitated, then reluctantly entered the room. He perched on the edge of a chair, his posture rigid. Mom, you should be resting. Lily shouldn't be bothering you. Nonsense, Clara retorted. Lily's presence is a comfort, not a bother. In fact, been meaning to talk to you both. I felt a flutter of nervousness in my stomach. Clara's tone suggested this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. What is it, Mom? Mark asked, a hint of worry creeping into his voice. Clara took a deep breath. I've been watching you two, and I can't stay silent any longer. Mark, the way you've been treating Lily, it's not right. Mark's face flushed red. Mom, you don't understand. I understand more than you think, Clara interrupted. I've seen the way you speak to her, the way you belittle her efforts. It reminds me of your father. The room fell silent. Mark's father had been a sore subject for years, his abusive behavior a dark cloud over Clara's past. I'm nothing like him, Mark whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. I squeezed Clara's hand, overwhelmed by her support. Clara, you don't have to. I do, Lily. She insisted. I won't stand by and watch history repeat itself. Mark, you need to take a hard look at your behavior. And Lily, you need to stand up for yourself. Mark stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured. As he stormed towards the door, Clara called out, Mark, there's something else you need to know. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. What? Clara's voice was steady, but I could feel her hand trembling in mine. I'm changing my will. I won't have my money used to support the mistreatment of others. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark turned slowly, his face a mask of shock and anger. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life, Clara replied. Unless things change, I'll be leaving everything to charity. Mark's eyes narrowed, darting between Clara and me. This is your doing, isn't it? He snarled at me. You've poisoned her against me. I stood facing him squarely. No, Mark, you've done this all on your own. He advanced towards me, his fists clenched. For a moment I thought he might strike me, but Clara's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Mark, don't you dare! He froze, then spun on his heel and stormed out of the room. The front door slammed moments later, shaking the house. I sank back onto the bed, my legs weak. Clara pulled me into a hug, her frail arms surprisingly strong. I'm so proud of you, Lily, she whispered. But I'm afraid this is just the beginning. As I held on to Clara, my mind raced. What would Mark do now? How far would he go to protect his inheritance? And most importantly, how would I find the strength to stand my ground in the face of his anger? Clara's words echoed in my mind. This was just the beginning. A storm was coming, and I needed to be ready. As I sat there, comforted by Clara's embrace, I made a silent vow. No matter what happened next, I wouldn't let Mark break me. It was time to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my future. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me awake. I fumbled for it in the darkness, my heart racing as I saw Mark's name on the screen. Lily, it's Mom. Mark's voice was tight with panic. She's had a stroke. We're at the hospital. I was out of bed and throwing on clothes before he finished speaking. I'm on my way. The drive to the hospital was a blur. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. When I arrived, I found Mark pacing in the waiting room, his face ashen. Where is she? I demanded. They're running tests, he replied, his voice hollow. It's bad, Lily. They're not sure if she'll... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Despite everything, my heart ached for him. I reached out, touching his arm gently. She's strong, Mark. She'll pull through. Hours passed in tense silence. Finally, a doctor approached us, her expression grave. Mrs. Henderson is stable, but her condition is serious. She'll need round-the-clock care for the foreseeable future. Mark and I exchanged glances. We both knew what this meant. We'll move in with her, Mark said decisively. We can take care of her at home. I nodded, pushing aside my reservations. Clara needed us, and that was all that mattered right now. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations. We packed up our essentials and moved into Clara's spacious house. As we settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the calm before the storm. I was right. Lily, where's my blue tie? Mark's irritated voice echoed through the house. I have an important meeting, and I can't find anything in this mess. I bit back a retort. We'd only been here for 3 days, and Mark was already falling back into old patterns. I'll find it for you, I called back, forcing my voice to remain calm. As I searched for the tie, I heard Clara's weak voice calling from her bedroom. I rushed to her side, finding her struggling to sit up. What do you need, Clara? I asked gently, helping her adjust her pillows. Just some water, dear, she whispered. As I held the glass to her lips, she caught my hand. Lily, I need to tell you something important. Before she could continue, Mark burst into the room. There you are. Did you find my tie? I turned to him, exasperated. Mark, your mother needs... My tie, Lily, he interrupted. I'm going to be late. Clara's grip on my hand tightened. Mark, she said, her voice surprisingly strong. Sit down, both of you. We obeyed, the tension in the room palpable. I've made a decision, Clara continued. I'm changing my will again. Lily, I want you to be my primary caregiver, and in return, I'm leaving half of my estate to you. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's face contorted with rage. You can't be serious, he sputtered. She's not even family. She's more family to me than you've been lately, Clara retorted. This is non-negotiable, Mark. As Mark stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him, I turned to Clara in shock. Clara, I can't accept this. It's too much. She squeezed my hand. You can, and you will. You deserve it, Lily. And you're going to need it. Need it? I echoed, confused. Clara's eyes met mine, filled with a mix of sadness and determination. Mark isn't the man we thought he was. There's something you need to know. As Clara began to speak, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, was about to change. And I realized, with a mixture of fear and resolve, that I was standing at a crossroads. The decision I made next would shape the rest of my life. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever Clara was about to reveal. I'm listening, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my heart. I stared at the pile of bills on the kitchen table, my stomach churning. Mark's latest budget cuts had left us scraping by, and I couldn't fathom how we'd manage this month's expenses. Everything all right, dear? Clara's gentle voice came from behind me. I quickly shuffled the papers together, forcing a smile. Just some household accounts, Clara. Nothing to worry about. She wheeled her chair closer, her eyes sharp despite her frail appearance. Lily, you don't have to hide things from me. I can see you're struggling. I sighed, the weight of our financial troubles pressing down on me. Mark's been tightening the purse strings lately. I'm just trying to make it all work. Clara's brow furrowed. That doesn't sound like the Mark I know. Has he explained why? Before I could answer, Mark's voice boomed from the hallway. Lily, where's the checkbook? I need to make a withdrawal. I froze, panic rising in my chest. We barely had enough to cover the bills as it was. Mark, wait! He strode into the kitchen, his eyes landing on the scattered papers. What's all this? Just organizing our expenses, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark, we need to talk about the budget. We're barely making ends meet as it is. His face darkened. Are you questioning my financial decisions? I'm doing what's best for this family. Clara interjected, her voice firm despite its weakness. Mark, if there are money troubles, we should discuss them as a family. He whirled on her. Stay out of this, Mom. It doesn't concern you. It does when you're living in my house, Clara shot back. The tension in the room was palpable. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Mark, please, we need to be honest about our situation. Where is all the money going? For a moment, I saw a flicker of something, fear, guilt, in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by anger. I don't have to explain myself to you. Just make it work, Lily. That's your job, isn't it? As he stormed out, slamming the front door behind him, I sank into a chair, my head in my hands. Clara wheeled over, placing a comforting hand on my arm. Lily, there's something you need to know. I've been doing some digging, and I think Mark might be. The shrill ring of the doorbell interrupted her. Wiping my eyes, I went to answer it. A striking blonde woman stood on the porch, her perfectly manicured hand clutching an expensive handbag. Is Mark here? She asked, her eyes darting past me into the house. He just left, I replied, a strange feeling settling in my gut. Can I help you? She hesitated, then thrust an envelope at me. Just give him this. Tell him Lydia stopped by. As she turned to leave, a small velvet box fell from her purse. I picked it up, my heart pounding as I recognized the logo of an exclusive jewelry store. Wait, you dropped, I called out, but she was already speeding away in a sleek sports car. I stumbled back inside, the envelope and box feeling like lead in my hands. Clara took one look at my face and wheeled herself over. Lily, what's wrong? With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a receipt for a diamond necklace, worth more than our mortgage payment. The date on it was last week, when Mark had claimed he couldn't afford to pay for Clara's new medication. Oh, Lily, Clara breathed, her eyes filled with sorrow. I'm so sorry. I suspected, but I didn't want to believe. The pieces were falling into place. The budget cuts, the secretive phone calls, the late nights at the office. My world was crumbling around me. I looked at Clara, tears streaming down my face. What do I do now? She grasped my hand firmly. You fight, Lily. You fight for yourself, for your dignity, and for the life you deserve. In that moment, standing in Clara's kitchen with evidence of my husband's betrayal in my hands, I made a decision. No more excuses, no more turning a blind eye. It was time to take control of my life, no matter the cost. You're right, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. It's time to fight back. The weeks following my discovery of Mark's affair were a blur of silent meals, tense conversations, and sleepless nights. I threw myself into caring for Clara, desperate for any distraction from the crumbling ruins of my marriage. One particularly trying afternoon, as I was helping Clara with her physical therapy, Mark stormed into the room, his face thunderous. Lily, we need to talk. Now. I exchanged a worried glance with Clara before following Mark to the study. He slammed the door behind us, making me flinch. Care to explain this? He thrust a piece of paper at me. It was a bank statement, showing a series of small withdrawals I'd been making. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I've been putting some money aside, for emergencies. Mark's eyes narrowed. Emergencies? Or are you planning to leave me? Mark, please, I began, but he cut me off. I knew it. You're stealing from me, plotting behind my back. Just like... He stopped abruptly. But I caught the slip. Just like who, Mark? Lydia? The color drained from his face. How do you know about Lydia? She came by the house, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Dropped off a receipt for a very expensive necklace. Funny how you can afford that, but not your mother's medication. Mark's shock quickly turned to rage. He advanced on me, backing me against the wall. You had no right to go through my things. And you had no right to betray our marriage. I shot back, finding a well of courage I didn't know I possessed. Just then, we heard a crash from Clara's room. We both rushed out to find her on the floor, her wheelchair overturned. "Mom!" Mark cried, helping her up. "What happened?" Clara's eyes met mine, and I saw a glimmer of something there. Determination, maybe even a hint of mischief. I was trying to reach my book. I'm sorry, I should have called for help." As Mark fussed over her, I noticed Clara slip something into my hand. It was a small key. "Third drawer in my dresser," she whispered. "Quick, while he's distracted." Heart pounding, I slipped away to Clara's room. The key fit perfectly into the lock of the third drawer. Inside, I found a thick folder labeled Mark Financials. I flipped it open, my eyes widening at what I saw. Bank statements, investment reports, even offshore account details, all showing far more money than Mark had ever admitted to having. And worse, evidence of large sums being funneled into an account under Lydia's name. "Oh, Mark," I whispered, my heart breaking all over again. "Lily, where are you?" Mark's voice echoed down the hallway. I quickly locked the drawer and hurried back to Clara's room, my mind reeling. "There you are," Mark said, eyeing me suspiciously. "Where did you go?" "Just getting a glass of water," I lied, avoiding his gaze. Clara spoke up, her voice weak but determined. "Mark, I think I need to go to the hospital. I'm not feeling well." The next few hours were a whirlwind of ambulance rides and emergency room visits. As we sat in the waiting room, Clara's words from earlier echoed in my mind. "You fight, Lily. You fight for yourself." I looked at Mark, slumped in his chair, his face a mask of worry and guilt. I thought of the folder hidden in Clara's drawer, of Lydia and her diamond necklace, of all the lies and betrayals. In that moment, I made a decision. I would fight, not just for myself, but for Clara and for the life I deserved. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, I would reclaim my dignity and my future. As the doctor approached us with news of Clara's condition, I steeled myself for the battle ahead. Little did I know, the true test of my resolve was yet to come. The shrill ring of the phone pierced the pre-dawn silence. I fumbled for it, my heart already racing. "Hello? Mrs. Henderson?" An unfamiliar voice. "This is Mercy Hospital. I'm afraid there's been a complication with your mother-in-law." The world tilted on its axis. "We'll be right there," I managed to choke out. I shook Mark awake, and we rushed to the hospital in tense silence. The halls were a blur as we followed a solemn-faced nurse to Clara's room. We were too late. "I'm so sorry," the doctor said softly. "We did everything we could." Mark collapsed into a chair, his face ashen. I stood frozen, unable to process the reality before me. Clara, my rock, my confidant, was gone. The next few days passed in a haze of grief and frantic preparations. I threw myself into arranging the funeral, desperate for any distraction from the gaping hole in my heart. On the day of the wake, I stood beside Mark, accepting condolences from a sea of unfamiliar faces. His hand on my back felt like a lead weight. "Such a tragedy," I overheard one of Mark's aunts whispering. "And to think if she'd been getting proper care at home." I stiffened, feeling Mark's grip tighten painfully on my waist. "What exactly are you implying, Aunt Marge?" Mark's voice was low, dangerous. The older woman sniffed. "Well, if Lily had been more attentive, perhaps." "How dare you?" I interrupted, my voice shaking with fury. "I did everything for Clara. Everything!" Mark pulled me aside roughly. "Lily, calm down. You're making a scene." "A scene?" I hissed. "Your aunt is practically accusing me of killing Clara, and you're worried about appearances?" His eyes narrowed. "Well, if you'd been home instead of out God knows where." "I was grocery shopping," I exploded. "Because you cut off access to our accounts, remember? I had to scrimp and save just to keep food on the table while you were off buying jewelry for your mistress." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Mark's face contorted with rage. "You vindictive bitch," he snarled. "How dare you bring that up here now?" "Mark!" His father's voice boomed across the room. "What is the meaning of this?" As Mark turned to face his father, I saw Lydia slip out of the room, her face pale. I made to follow her, but Faith appeared at my side, gripping my arm. "Lily, don't," she whispered urgently. This isn't the time or place. I sagged against her, suddenly exhausted. You're right, I can't do this anymore, Faith. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Then don't. You've got the evidence Clara left you, right? Use it. End this, once and for all. I took a deep breath, straightening my spine. She was right. It was time to fight back. As I turned back to the room, I saw Mark engaged in a heated argument with his father. Our eyes met across the crowded space, and I saw a flicker of fear in his gaze. He knew I had the power to destroy him now. I made my way towards them, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. This ends now, I thought. But before I could reach them, a commotion erupted near the casket. Mark's brother was on his knees, clutching a piece of paper and sobbing. What is it? Mark's father demanded. Thomas, what's wrong? Thomas looked up, his face a mask of shock and grief. It's Mom's will. She changed it. She left everything to Lily. The room erupted into chaos. I stood frozen, feeling all eyes turned to me. Mark's face was a storm of fury and disbelief. In that moment, I realized the true battle was just beginning. Clara had given me the ultimate weapon, but at what cost? As accusations and questions flew around me, I steeled myself for the fight ahead. For Clara, for myself, I would see this through to the bitter end. The tension in the lawyer's office was palpable as we gathered for the reading of Clara's will. Mark sat across from me, his jaw clenched, while his family huddled together, shooting daggers in my direction. Faith squeezed my hand reassuringly as Clara's lawyer, Mr. Jameson, cleared his throat. Before we begin, Mr. Jameson said, Mrs. Henderson left a letter to be read aloud. He pulled out an envelope and began to read. My dear family, if you're hearing this, I'm no longer with you, but I hope my final act will bring the truth to light and right some wrongs. Lily, you've been more of a daughter to me than I could have ever hoped for. Mark, my son, I love you, but I cannot condone your actions any longer. Mark's face paled as Mr. Jameson continued, detailing Mark's infidelity, financial manipulations, and emotional abuse. With each revelation, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Clara had known. She had seen everything. And so, Mr. Jameson concluded, Mrs. Henderson has left her entire estate to Lily with one condition, that she use it to build a new life for herself, free from the constraints and abuse she has endured. The room erupted into chaos. Mark lunged across the table, his face contorted with rage. You manipulative bitch, he snarled. You turned my own mother against me. I stood my ground, meeting his gaze steadily. No, Mark, you did that all on your own. His father intervened, pulling Mark back. Is this true? He demanded. Everything in that letter? Mark's silence was all the confirmation needed. His Aunt Marge burst into tears while his brother Thomas looked on in disgust. As the family argued amongst themselves, I turned to Mr. Jameson. There's more, isn't there? I asked quietly. He nodded, handing me a thick folder. Financial records, Mrs. Henderson. Enough evidence to ensure a very favorable divorce settlement should you choose that path. I clutched the folder to my chest, feeling a surge of gratitude for Clara's foresight and love. I looked at Mark, the man I had once loved, now a stranger consumed by greed and bitterness. Mark, I said, my voice steady, I want a divorce. He laughed bitterly. You think you've won, don't you? You've got nothing without me. You're nothing without me. I shook my head, feeling a newfound strength coursing through me. No, Mark, I'm everything without you. I'm free. As I turned to leave, Lydia burst into the room, her face tear-stained. Mark, I'm pregnant, she blurted out. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Mark, saw the panic in his eyes, and felt nothing. No pain, no anger, just a profound sense of relief. Congratulations, I said softly. I hope you'll be a better father than you were a husband. With that, I walked out of the office, out of my old life, and into a future bright with possibility. Faith fell into step beside me, grinning from ear to ear. So what now? She asked. I took a deep breath, feeling the warm California sun on my face. Now? Now I live, Faith. For the first time in years, I truly live. As we drove away, I thought of Clara, of her strength and wisdom. She had given me more than just financial security. She had given me the courage to reclaim my life. In the months that followed, I used Clara's inheritance to start a foundation, helping women escape abusive relationships. I found purpose in my work, joy in my newfound freedom, and peace in the knowledge that I had survived and thrived. Mark's attempts to contest the will fell flat in the face of the evidence Clara had gathered. Our divorce was finalized quickly, leaving him with far less than he'd hoped for. As I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sunset over the city, I raised a glass to Clara's memory. "Thank you," I whispered to the wind, "for everything." The future stretched out before me, full of promise and possibility. I was no longer Mark's wife, no longer a victim. I was Lily, strong, resilient, and finally, gloriously free. "How dare you show your face here?" I hissed as soon as I caught sight of Alex sauntering towards me across the school parking lot. My hands clenched by my sides, nails digging into my palms. Alex slid his sunglasses down his nose, his mouth curling into a satisfied smirk. "Well, if it isn't my darling ex-wife Meredith, you're looking tired." His gaze raked down my body. I refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "What do you want, Alex?" "Can't I walk my daughter into school?" He mocked offense. Our daughter Lila peered at Alex from behind me, unimpressed. She was wise beyond her 7 years when it came to her father. "You didn't even call her on her birthday last week," I said sharply. "So let's drop the devoted dad act." Alex's smirk faded. Before he could retort, a sleek black SUV pulled up beside us. The driver's door swung open and Ethan stepped out, tall and impeccably dressed. I felt a rush of relief at the sight of my husband. "Everything okay here?" Ethan asked mildly as he moved to stand beside me. Lila immediately went to him for a hug. Alex's lip curled derisively. "Oh, look, your white knight has arrived with his fancy new car. Too bad money can't buy taste or erase your seedy past." Ethan tensed, but a warning glance from me made him hold his tongue. I refused to indulge Alex's juvenile jabs about Ethan's privileged background, not that it was any business of his. "You should leave," I said coldly. Instead, Alex gestured at Ethan's SUV with its Delmont Foods logo. "I see you clawed your way to the top after all. Then again, sleeping with the boss has always been your specialty, hasn't it, Meredith?" Red-hot anger flooded me. How dare Alex throw cheap accusations at me when he was the one who had destroyed our marriage? But before I could spit out a furious retort, Ethan gently squeezed my shoulder. "Actually, I'm not an employee." Ethan's voice was calm and steady. "I was just named CEO last month when my father retired. So technically, this is now my company." Utter shock flashed across Alex's face. It gave me a rush of vicious satisfaction to realize he'd never known. Ethan came from one of the wealthiest families in the state, inheriting a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Alex had only ever seen him as another junior executive at Delmont. "You..." Alex's mouth opened and closed, uncharacteristically lost for words. Ethan gave a thin smile. "Yes, my trust fund alone could buy and sell you a dozen times over. Not that I make a habit of flaunting my family money." He flicked a piece of lint off his impeccably tailored suit. "I just wanted to make one thing very clear, Alex. You are not welcome here. This school, this town, it's my territory now. Stay away from my family, or you'll regret it." Alex paled, shrinked back. Without another word, he turned and hurried away across the parking lot. I let out a long breath as we watched his retreating figure. "Well then," Ethan slipped an arm around me, "I'd say that's enough drama for one morning." Despite everything, I found myself smiling. No matter what storms we weathered, as long as I had Ethan by my side, I knew I could survive anything Alex tried to throw our way. When Ethan said he wanted to grab coffee after dropping Lila off at school, I readied myself for the talk I knew was coming. Ethan took a long sip of his latte, then set it down and turned to face me. "So, you and Alex, and me too for that matter, all worked at Delmont Foods when you met, and the rest is history." "The very short version of history," I said softly. "Well, let me tell you a quick story on my end." Ethan leaned back, holding my gaze with his steady, pale eyes. "You started as an assistant about 6 months before I rolled up from California, another recent MBA grad hotshot, hungry for my first real corporate job. One day the CEO himself takes me out on the Delmont yacht as a perk. And there you were in this tiny bikini." I felt myself flush at the memory. My God, how young and foolish I'd been. Barely 26, vainly trying to land a higher-up boyfriend and climbing up the food giant that was Delmont. Honestly, Meredith, I liked you immediately. You were smart, scrappy, vivacious. Ethan shrugged, almost shyly. But I could also tell you were unavailable. A few discreet questions revealed you were dating hotshot young marketing exec Alex Karev. I winced inwardly at Alex's name. How naive I'd been back then, too, imaging us the perfect corporate power couple. If only I could travel back and warn my past self not to ignore all the red flags. Anyway, I tried to move on and focus on my own career, Ethan went on. But, funny enough, here we are 10 years later, exes with Alex and married instead to each other. Ethan raised an eyebrow, softening his words with a wry smile. I chuckled despite the maelstrom of emotions stirred up by this stroll down memory lane. Here we are indeed. Who could have predicted this is where life would take us? I reached across to squeeze his arm. Lucky me, though. Ethan covered my hand gently. I like to think we both got lucky in round 2, Mir. His voice turned somber. But now I think it's time you told me what really went down between you and Alex. I sighed, old hurts rising up from long-buried depths. Honestly, Ethan, I don't know if I have the full story even now. He changed, slowly at first, stayed out more for drinks with the guys, networked aggressively like his life depended on it. I was scrambling to build my own career too, though, so maybe I just didn't want to see the signs. I shook my head at my own willful blindness. Back then, I just wanted the success, the status, the money. I was willing to ignore too much in exchange for that glittering dream. In hindsight, he was clearly cheating on me for months before I caught him with his assistant. I swallowed hard. It was the biggest cliché punch in the gut, and I wasn't even that shocked, just numb at my own stupidity. Oh, Meredith. Ethan's voice was gentle. Don't blame yourself. Alex made those choices. I wanted to make it work at first. I stared into my coffee, remembering those wretched attempts to salvage things as Alex grew ever more brazen with his affair. But when I got pregnant unexpectedly with Lila, it pushed me over the edge. I filed for divorce when I was 8 months along. Ethan blew out a long breath, shaking his head. Well, now Alex popping up again makes more sense. Unfinished business simmering under the surface. I nodded wearily. In my heart, I knew this was only the beginning. Alex's ego would drive him to keep needling old wounds, trying to tear down the happier life I'd built without him. Well, I was more than ready for the fight now. Alex had no idea what he was provoking. My hands shook as I quietly closed Lila's bedroom door, her sobs still echoing in my ears. At 6 years old, she'd just learned the hard truth. Her father didn't want her anymore. I still wasn't sure what had prompted Alex to suddenly file for full custody. Leela had come home from his weekend visit utterly distraught, clutching the court notice. She'd always been an afterthought for Alex at best, so why this sudden strategic move against me now? I stepped out the front door for air, nausea and anger battling inside me. As if conjured by my despair, a sleek sports car purred up the street right then, gliding to a stop at the curb just beyond my driveway. Jenna. Of course, Alex's blonde assistant turned mistress had come to gloat. I strode up to her lowered window, fury overriding my disgust. Well, hello there, Meredith. Jenna purred, snapping her gum. Long time no see. Her smug gaze traveled over my worn yoga pants and faded hoodie. Rough day? Cut the crap. I crossed my arms, refusing to let her see me ruffled. I'm guessing you're behind this latest stunt from Alex. Does his wife know you're running around town doing his dirty work? Jenna scowled, dropping her faux friendly act. Good. Maybe if you weren't such a shitty mom, Alex wouldn't have to step in for the sake of your daughter, she snapped spitefully. Red hazed my vision. Without thinking, I reached in and snatched the sunglasses off her surgically perfected nose. Listen very closely, you plastic little homewrecker. My voice lashed like a whip as I leaned down to get in her face. You both may have money and connections, but I have everything to lose, and that makes me dangerous. I crushed her $100 shades in my fist. Now get the hell out of my neighborhood before you regret it. Jenna shrank away, for once stunned silent. I stepped back and let her peel off in a squeal of tires. As her taillights disappeared from sight, the red rage seeped away, leaving me drained and hollow. I trudged back inside with leaden limbs, pausing as my eyes landed on the pile of legal documents awaiting my response. Even just glancing at the logo for Alex's law firm kicked my heart rate up again. This was bad. Alex had the fancy lawyers and privilege on his side. While I could barely scrape rent together some months, he clearly aimed to bury me in legal bills, grinding me down through attrition. Exhausted and beaten down by the day's events, I collapsed onto the couch and finally let the tears fall. Hugging a throw pillow to my chest, I let myself cry in heaving sobs. For Lila's innocence shattered too young, for the years and dreams I'd wasted on Alex, for the injustice of seeing bad people continuously rewarded while the good suffered undeserved misery. A quiet knock at the door startled me. Scrubbing hastily at my face, I peeked out to see Ethan on my doorstep, his expression full of concern. Lila's teacher mentioned there was drama with Alex today and you left upset. I just wanted to come check on you both. He shuffled his feet. I know I'm probably overstepping, but I had to make sure you were okay. A fresh sob rose in my throat at this kindness. I stepped back in a wordless invitation. Ethan hovered uncertainly just inside. I'm so sorry you're dealing with this crap from Alex now on top of everything else. His jaw tightened, a hard glint entering those soft blue eyes. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but sometimes karma takes too damn long with assholes like him. Despite everything, his vehemence surprised a watery chuckle from me. I sank back down onto the couch, suddenly beyond grateful not to be alone in this battle anymore. Thank you for coming by, Ethan. I really needed a friendly face tonight. I wiped my eyes, feeling the tiniest spark of hope flickering back to life inside me. And as for Alex, trust me, his karma is coming, one way or another. I tapped my foot impatiently against the courthouse floor, my nerves stretched thin. Any minute now, I expected to hear the click of Alex's designer shoes stalking up the hall, flanked by his army of suits. But the footsteps that approached were slower, more measured. I looked up and, to my astonishment, saw Ethan striding towards me, looking crisp and confident in a charcoal suit that had to cost more than my car. Ethan, what are you doing here? I stared at him, confused. Ever since becoming an unexpected shoulder for me to lean on these past few turbulent months, Ethan had been nothing short of a godsend. But I couldn't imagine why he'd turned up here today of all days. Wordlessly, Ethan held open the conference room door, gesturing for me to enter first. Bewildered, I stepped inside. My knees nearly buckled with relief at the sight of Lila laughing happily away on Izzy's lap. Alex's attorney sister had a soft spot for my daughter even amidst this legal crossfire. I rushed over, unable to resist sweeping Lila into a fierce hug. Over her shoulder, I shot Ethan a questioning look. He gave me a slow smile. I'm your new pro bono legal counsel. Surprise. What? How? I sank weakly down into a chair, dizzy with shock. Ethan sat beside me. I called in a favor from an old friend from my Harvard law days who owed me big time. Once I explained the situation with Alex trying to drown you in legal fees as retaliation, he was happy to help. Well, Iz and I decided to throw dear Alex a curveball this morning. Izzy smirked from across the table. Nothing screws up a bully's game plan like being utterly ignored. I glanced between them, almost giddy with relief. Having Izzy on my side had been a key advantage so far, but with Ethan's high-profile connections on board too, I felt unstoppable. Now, Ethan pulled out an intimidatingly thick folder of documents and turned to me with a smile. Let's talk about preempting every devious maneuver your ex may try. Don't worry about the legal bills anymore, Mir. I want to help protect you and Lila any way I can. His hand covered mine, warm and steadying. My heart gave an odd flutter. I tried to ignore the tiny inner voice pointing out all Ethan's attractive qualities, now amplified tenfold in a suit. There would be time later to analyze whatever was simmering between us lately. For now, I needed to focus on the fight ahead. All right, ladies, let's crush this. Izzy cracked her knuckles dramatically and winked at Lila. Auntie Izzy and Godfather Ethan have a bulletproof battle plan ready for the judge, so your mean old dad doesn't stand a chance. Lila's grin filled me with fierce determination. I would move heaven and earth before I let Alex torment my daughter for his petty games. Not when we finally had a real shot at a stable, happy future now, thanks to Ethan. I knew with bone-deep certainty that I could weather any coming storms with this man by my side. My premonition proved true over the whirlwind legal proceedings that followed. Just as Izzy predicted, Alex failed to make even a ripple fighting against the strategic duo of her and Ethan combined. At last came the bittersweet final signing of divorce papers I'd evaded completing for so long. My hand trembled slightly as I scrawled my name one last time as Meredith Kurev. Ethan's steadying grip on my shoulder kept me grounded. As we left the imposing courthouse doors for good, I tipped my face up to the brilliant sunlight with relief. The future lay ahead, filled with promise. I could focus on Lila now, on my career, on exploring this surprising new connection with Ethan. The past could finally rest in peace. I turned to Ethan with joyful tears sparkling in my eyes. "It's over. We're free." His answering smile outshone even the dazzling sunshine above. "No, Meredith." He squeezed my hand, his own rare public display revealing the depth of emotion behind that reserved facade. "This is only the beginning." As I hurried down the echoing corridor towards the principal's office, my heart pounded out a frantic beat. The urgent summons from Lila's school ignited all my worst fears. Had Alex overstepped his bounds and caused more trouble? I burst into the room, my stomach knotted into a tangled mess. But the sight behind the imposing oak desk left me speechless. Alex huddled on one chair, suit disheveled and sporting the beginnings of a black eye. Beside him sat Jenna, vainly trying to cover what looked suspiciously like a bite mark marring her exposed shoulder, and standing guard over them both with crossed arms and icy fury blazing in his blue eyes stood Ethan. "Good, you're finally here." Ethan's tone was clipped, a sure sign his anger still simmered below that polished executive surface. "Perhaps you can shed some light on exactly what happened at the playground today, because your ex-husband and his accomplice seem a little dazed on the details." It was only then I noticed Lila tucked against Ethan's side, looking tiny and stressed but physically unharmed. Overwhelming relief at seeing my baby girl uninjured temporarily muted my barrage of questions. I went straight to her and swept her into my arms. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I pulled back to search her face worriedly. I rushed right over as soon as they called me. Lila's lower lip wobbled. "Aunt Jenna and Daddy came when me and Zoe were playing. They started yelling that Zoe's mom was a stupid lying lawyer," she sniffled. "Zoe cried and ran away. I got mad and bit Aunt Jenna." Her voice rose defiantly on the last line. I blinked, impressed despite myself at my daughter's bold defense of her friend. "Yes, and that was very wrong." Ethan smoothed down Lila's hair gently. "We don't settle fights with our teeth, even when protecting people we care about." He shot a reproving look at Jenna, who flushed and looked away. I stood, hands anchored on my hips. "Would someone please explain what the hell is going on here?" I demanded. Behind me, Alex made a disgruntled noise, but wisely stayed silent. Ethan guided me a few steps away and spoke lowly. Apparently Zoe's mother represented Jenna's ex in a nasty divorce, like ripping him off for millions level nasty. His mouth flattened grimly. "I assume they came here today meaning to cause trouble for her through the kids." Red-hot rage flooded my veins. The absolute nerve of Alex and his scheming girlfriend, dragging innocent children into their deranged grudges. I crossed quickly back to Lila, brushing her hair back to meet her eyes intently. "You were so brave defending your friend. I'm proud of you for standing up to bullies." Over her head, I pinned Alex and Jenna with a blistering look promising swift later retribution. Their twin glares bounced off my fury like droplets of rain. Just then the door banged open, admitting a harried woman I recognized as Zoe's mother. Her shocked gaze bounced between our tense tableau and Lila tucked protectively under my arm. "Mrs. Quinn." Ethan swiftly intercepted her, laying on his polished CEO charm. "Let's step into the hall to discuss the incident from a legal perspective." He put a hand on her back, smoothly guiding her out. Through the window, I watched him work his magic, doubtlessly summarizing events in a light most favorable towards the girls. I focused back on my daughter, letting Ethan handle diffusing the situation his way. My priority stood cradled here in my arms. The rest could come later. "Let's get you home, baby girl." I lifted Lila's chin gently. "I think we've all had enough drama for one day." Her answering watery smile and tight hug soothed my raging heart. As we left the tense office behind, I sent up a silent prayer of thanks for Ethan. Yet again he'd raced to our rescue like a dark knight in his sleek black car. And I'd never felt more secure knowing together we could conquer any monsters who dared threaten our peace. The tense silence stretched between us in the aftermath of my furious tirade. Ethan leaned back against the couch, jaw tight as he processed my barrage of bitter revelations. At last, the toxic flood tide of secrets from my past unleashed, I felt hollowed out physically and emotionally. Ethan dragged a hand over his face warily. "Jesus, Mir, I'm so sorry you and Lila have shouldered this toxicity alone for so long. That level of obsessive harassment. He shook his head, lines of anger bracketing his mouth. Why the hell haven't you involved the authorities before now? I closed my eyes against the rush of old shame. At first, I just kept hoping if I put my head down and focused on being a good mom, eventually Alex would lose interest when he didn't get a rise out of me. I exhaled shakily. But lately it feels like the floodgates opened. Like now that I'm actually happy again, he's snapped. Ethan reached over and squeezed my hand gently. This cycle of violence stops now, Meredith. No more handling this alone. I'm calling my private security team and a lawyer first thing tomorrow. Then I want to sit down with Lila and explain gently why she won't see her father unsupervised anymore. His eyes tightened with suppressed fury. Whatever it takes, I won't let that volatile bastard near either of you again. Overwhelmed with relief at finally setting down my exhaustive burden, I leaned into Ethan's strength literally and figuratively. Just feeling his solid chest under my cheek unleashed a fresh wave of tears, only this time, cathartic ones. I wept for the naive girl who once loved Alex unguardedly, for the battered woman who broke finally leaving him, for the protective mother hardened into vigilance against his campaign of cruelty. All different versions of myself rendered refugees by one man's destructive obsession. Ethan simply held me through the storm, hands gently rubbing my back. Having witnessed the traumatic genesis firsthand now, he no doubt understood this purge stood long overdue. At last I surfaced, scrubbing the heels of my hands roughly over my swollen eyes. I'm so sorry for dumping all this ugliness into your lap, Ethan, I rasped hoarsely. You deserve better than being saddled with another man's damage. His fingertips nudged my chin up insistently. You have nothing to apologize for. I care about you, both of you, deeply. I'm not going anywhere. His earnest words unlocked something painfully vulnerable in my chest. Before reason could intervene, I leaned forward and pressed my lips desperately to his. Our first kiss held no artifice or sweet romantic pretense, just raw, exposed need meeting steadfast reassurance. Perfect understanding passed soul-deep between us in the charged silence after we finally broke apart. Ethan grazed my cheek lightly with his thumb. We'll get through this fire, Meredith. Together. I covered his broad hand with my own, finally daring to hope again for the first time in years. With Ethan beside me, even Alex's sinister storm clouds seemed surmountable threats rather than looming doom. Bolstered by newfound courage, I hugged Lila close that night and made a silent, solemn vow over her sleeping form. No matter the costs, Alex would never torment my baby again. His twisted attacks ended now, one way or another. Mama Bear had awoken at last to protect and shelter her cub, and not even his savagery could stand against my ferocity for long. All his earlier tempests now seemed paltry preludes to the full hurricane fury I would rain down if Alex dared menace my daughter further. For Lila's sake and mine both, the reckoning had arrived, and not even hell itself held an agony sufficient for unleashing on that miserable man, should he push me too far. I stirred my morning coffee absently, still mentally spinning over the latest unthinkable stunt from Alex. Luring Lila out of school illegally to take her for ice cream without my permission counted as kidnapping in my book, never mind his pathetic arguments about just wanting father-daughter bonding time. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, jolting me from vengeful fantasies of sixing Ethan's security squad on my deranged ex. Speak of the devil, I smiled instinctively just seeing Ethan's handsome face flash on my screen. Please tell me you have good news on the Alex front, I answered without preamble. Even better. Ethan's smooth voice held a smile. I come bearing gifts of gourmet cupcakes and moral support. Buzz me up? I glanced down at my faded college sweatshirt and messy topknot. Not exactly hostess chic, but then again Ethan had seen me far more haggard lately. You're a lifesaver, I sighed, pressing the door release. Moments later I ushered him inside, unable to resist going up on tiptoes to steal a quick kiss. Ever since that emotionally charged evening when our relationship shifted into romantic territory, I couldn't get enough of Ethan's steadying presence. He held up a box from my favorite bakery, looking unfairly gorgeous with his slightly rumpled hair and open collar exposing a tantalizing V of skin. Couldn't have you facing the lawyer on an empty stomach, he winked. I grinned despite my endless Alex-induced headaches. God bless this man. Over lavish red velvet cupcakes, Ethan outlined the injunction paperwork barring Alex from contacting either Lila or me outside official supervised visitation. And if he violates these court orders even once, he'll not only face contempt charges, but also trigger an automatic restraining order. Ethan looked immensely satisfied delivering this news. I could have cried in relief knowing the legal avenues now protected us while the bigger investigation into Alex's shady practices unfolded. Turns out even wealthy corporate executives had limits to flouting the rules under Ethan's watchful eye. Stuffed on cream cheese frosting and justice, I relaxed back with a contented sigh. Hopefully Alex finally realizes he's not exempt from facing consequences. Here's hoping. Ethan stacked our empty plates. Unfortunately, when it comes to ruthless narcissists like your ex-husband, the hard lesson usually requires hammering home a few times. His expression turned serious. I know you're not scared easily, Meredith, but please promise you'll let my security team handle any direct interactions if Alex approaches you or Lila again. My instinctive, stubborn independence bristled slightly at the protective decree, but the earnest love shining in Ethan's eyes wore my reluctance down. I knew his directive came from caring deeply rather than any deliberately heavy-handed male posturing. I lifted our joined hands and brushed a soft kiss over Ethan's knuckles. I promise, babe. No more stubbornly trying to tackle everything solo. His shoulders relaxed, tension easing from his frame. Our sweet moment got interrupted by Lila bounding through the door fresh from school, full of chatter about her day. As we listened indulgently to her winding stories, I felt my heart settle into calm, steady rhythm for the first time in forever. The trials of my past with Alex seemed now muted nightmares compared to this luminous present with Ethan and Lila. I'd been running so hard towards imaginary futures before. I missed recognizing the only dreams worth chasing sat right here under this roof, filled with laughter and light. No matter what storms still brewed on the horizon, together we'd shine brightly enough to weather even Alex's bitterest gale forces. This right here already felt like home, the safe harbor I'd fought so desperately to reach through so many dark and frightening nights. At long last, we'd found our way home.